Hello, welcome to Manhwa Nuna. Today, we will be recapping the manhwa called Bullshit. Please like, comment, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Enjoy. At Yeonghwadang Inn, Yeon Sahee is working non-stop to prepare for an important guest. With Mrs. Chun, the innkeeper, sick, everything falls on her shoulders. After hauling a massive vase, she pauses to catch her breath, thinking about how the annex, untouched for 9 years, had been her quiet workspace until last week. Now it is completely transformed, unrecognizable, with all the fancy decorations for the guest. Exhausted, she sits down on a rock, hoping for a brief moment of peace. Her rest didn't last long. She overhears someone calling out to Lee Hyungu, a familiar name. By the fence, Hyungu stops to chat with the guy, an old friend from high school. The friend starts complaining about how his family wouldn't stop nagging him to get married, saying he was way too young for that kind of hassle. Curious, he asks if Hyungu's family is pressuring him, too. That's when Hyungu casually mentions he might end up marrying Sahee. The friend can't hide his surprise, and wants to know if Hyungu and Sahee are a thing. Hyungu explains they aren't, but their families have been discussing the idea. This gets the friend all worked up, reminding Hyungu how Sahee used to be the guy's first love in high school. He asks if she is still as beautiful as everyone remembers. Hyungu replies that being pretty is all Sahee has going for her. He even throws in a nasty jab, calling her crippled and wondering what else anyone could possibly see in her. To make it worse, he mentions that his mom is against the whole marriage idea anyway. Sahee, who has been listening to the entire conversation, stands up abruptly, remembering there is still work to be done. She limps away, determined to finish her tasks before the important guest arrives. As she rounds a corner, she spots a man casually smoking. Their eyes meet, and for a brief moment, time seems to pause. The quiet is broken by Hyungu's friend's voice carrying over the fence, asking loudly how Hyungu plans to be intimate with her and if she isn't crippled from the waist down. Hyungu casually replies that only her ankle is affected and everything above is fine. The friend laughs, then asks if Hyungu has already had a taste of her. Hyungu says no, but he probably will soon and promises to share the details afterward. Sahee starts to walk away, but her ankle betrays her, and she stumbles. The man flicks his cigarette aside and catches her before she can fall. Their eyes lock, his gaze steady. He asks if she's the woman the men are talking about. She politely excuses herself and pulls away from him. Without another word, she limps off. Reaching Yeonghwadang's main building, Sahee straightens herself as she enters. Inside, her grandmother is seated, entertaining Madame Min Yojin of Youngmoon Enterprises. Her grandmother's sharp eyes land on her immediately. Sahee greets Yojin politely, introduces herself, and informs her that she will be assisting during her stay. Yojin's gaze lingers on her, sharp and assessing, before she turns to the grandmother. She asks if Sahee is the granddaughter they were discussing earlier. The grandmother clarifies that the one they were speaking of is the second child. Sahee, the eldest, is only stepping in because the other has fallen ill. Yojin comments on Sahee's beauty, joking that the grandmother must have praised CEO Jung's looks while having such a pretty granddaughter herself. The grandmother chuckles lightly, brushing off the remark, saying a simple countryside girl like Sahee could never compare to someone like CEO Jung. Then, her tone turns brisk. She looks at Sahee with a stern expression and orders her to bring in some tea, despite the full pot already on the table. Sahee catches the unspoken warning in her grandmother's gaze, don't dare upset their guest. She nods, keeping her composure, and heads off to fulfill the unnecessary request. As Sahee limps away, her grandmother turns to Yojin and casually mentions that Sahee's legs aren't in the best shape, but that she's quite skilled with her hands. Yojin, nodding thoughtfully, offers to refer them to a good doctor, and the grandmother agrees. Later, when Sahee is alone, her grandmother finds her and grabs her face with an almost harsh grip. She scolds Sahee for wearing makeup while meeting such an important guest, wiping the lipstick off her lips with a tissue. With a stern look, she reminds Sahee that the privilege of living in the house is due to Yojin's family, and tells her not to forget it. She warns Sahee to simply assist Yojin until Mrs. Chun recovers and avoids any misunderstandings with her. As she finishes, she tells Sahee to ensure that the rooms are comfortable since the annex will be empty for dinner. Sahee heads toward the annex, determined to follow her grandmother's advice. She tells herself she'll do her best to stay out of the way and avoid getting involved with the guests, which was her plan all along, but as she opens the door to one of the rooms, she freezes. There, standing shirtless, is the man from earlier. She stammers out an apology, quickly closing the door, thinking she's already messed up. But to her surprise, the man invites her in. Sahee peeks inside the room and is relieved to see the man is now fully dressed. She steps in hesitantly, apologizing for her rudeness. He points out curtly that she didn't knock. Flustered, she explains she was informed he had left for dinner and apologizes again. The man walks up to her and silently stares, his intense gaze making her nervous. Just as he opens his mouth to say something, his secretary appears at the doorway, addressing him as CEO Jung. The secretary informs him that the preparations for the video conference are complete and they need to leave immediately. Sahee takes the opportunity to excuse herself, but before she can leave, CEO Jung stops her and orders her to bring his dinner to his room later. Then, without waiting for her response, he walks out with his secretary. The following day, Madame Yeonghwadang prays for her son Yeon Taeon in the temple. While the son, Taeon, sits in a corner of the room, engrossed in his tablet. Yeonghwadang's frustration boils over, and she yells at him to come offer prayers properly. She accuses him of sulking over having to stay at Yeonghwadang right after returning to Korea, reminding him that it was the chairman's decision. Trying to soothe the situation, she tells him to think of this as his first real break in a long time, but Taeon ignores her completely. At that moment, Sahee announces her presence from the doorway, catching Taeon's attention. She steps into the room, carrying a glass of cold water that Yeonghwadang had requested. Taeon's focus shifts entirely to her, and he openly stares, his gaze making Sahee uncomfortable. As she serves Yeonghwadang, the older woman begins questioning her. Yeonghwadang asks her age, and Sahee replies that she's 28. Without skipping a beat, Yeonghwadang then asks if she has a boyfriend. Caught off guard, Sahee answers that she doesn't. Yeonghwadang presses further, asking why. Sahee calmly replies that she doesn't have that in mind at the moment. Yeonghwadang comments that with her youth and beauty, she should have no trouble finding one. Yeonghwadang starts rambling about the importance of finding a partner and settling down, even trying to pull Taeon into the conversation. He simply laughs, which makes her pause. She asks if something she said was funny, and he replies that her words were encouraging. Sensing an opening, she dives in, telling him he needs someone reliable by his side to help manage the company. She suggests he use his free time in the countryside to go on blind dates. Taeon surprises her by agreeing, all while locking eyes with Sahee. His sudden agreement catches Yeonghwadang off guard, especially since he's always brushed off the idea before, claiming he was too busy. Meanwhile, Sahee looks away, clearly uneasy under his gaze. Yeonghwadang, snapping back into action, hands Sahee an envelope containing a list of potential blind date partners. She instructs her to deliver it to the priestess so the matches can be evaluated for compatibility with Taeon. With that, she announces that they are leaving. As they head back to their rooms, Yeonghwadang advises Taeon to handle the blind dates efficiently, just meet the women and proceed if there's a connection. Glancing at her son, she silently debates whether he's genuinely interested or simply humoring her. Casually, she asks if Sahee is beautiful, mentioning that the girl has caught her attention. Without skipping a beat, she adds, almost teasingly, if Sahee is his type. Taeon laughs and, with a smirk, jokingly tells his mother that she might as well buy him protection while she's at it, and walks off. As he strolls away, he thinks that if he is interested in someone, all he needs to do is make a move. Sahee's face flashes in his mind, and he admits to himself that she is undeniably beautiful. But with a shake of his head, he dismisses the idea, deciding he has no intention of wasting time on what he considers foolish distractions. Sahee, exhausted after delivering the envelope to her grandmother, heads to the annex with a basket of laundry. She's eager to finish up and retreat to her own room. When she reaches Taeon's room, she announces herself, but there's no response. Relieved that he's not inside, she steps in and begins tidying up. Her eyes land on the untouched dinner she brought him the previous night, still sitting exactly where she left it. She frowns, wondering why he asked for it if he wasn't going to eat. Her thoughts wander to how entitled he seems, someone who's probably had everything handed to him since birth and doesn't think twice about bossing others around. As she works, her mind drifts to the strange looks he's been giving her, even in front of Madame Yeojin. He doesn't even bother to hide it, which unsettles her. She tells herself she has to avoid getting involved with him. After all, he won't be staying long, and he's already meeting potential marriage partners. Then she notices something. On a table, there's a large box of protection, CD. Her face flushes as the implications hit her. She recalls Mrs. Chun once mentioning that some guests use Yeonghwadang as a hideaway for their secret affairs. She feels a mix of disbelief and disgust. Taeon's audacity shocks her, especially since he's unmarried and his room is so close to his mother's. Even though the annex is divided into 2 sections, it doesn't excuse the shamelessness. Meanwhile, Taeon approaches the annex, finding his secretary waiting outside the door. He asks his secretary why he's outside. The secretary hands him a cup of coffee and explains that his room is being cleaned, so he's waiting outside. Taeon takes the coffee and glances toward his room, where he sees Sahee's figure moving inside. As Sahee steps out of the room, she locks eyes with Taeon, who's standing just a few feet away. His secretary, Secretary Kim, greets her with a polite smile and introduces himself. Sahee nods, brushing off her nerves, and informs them that she's finished cleaning, so they're free to go inside. She starts to walk away, but Taeon stops her, holding out his coffee for her to take. The memory of the box of CD flashes through her mind, along with Mrs. Chun's words. She shakes her head, politely but firmly declining with a quick, "No, I'm fine." Without another word, she turns and walks away, leaving Taeon watching her retreating figure. Her final words echo in his mind as he sips his coffee, his curiosity piqued. He wonders if she thinks he's planning to pounce on her, or if there's something else making her so curt with him. When Taeon steps into his room, his eyes immediately land on the box of protection. He smirks, quickly concluding that his mother must have sent it. The realization that Sahee probably saw it makes him chuckle softly to himself. He finds the idea amusing, and oddly intriguing. Taeon gestures toward the box of protection and asks Secretary Kim why it's there, adding that even if it was on his mother's orders, a little more discretion would have been appreciated. Secretary Kim immediately apologizes, but Taeon waves it off, telling him to forget about it. Curious, Kim asks if something happened between Taeon and his mother. Taeon replies that she's on edge lately. Kim nods, then suddenly vents his own frustration, saying he understands the madam's feelings, but can't help being irritated himself. When Taeon casually asks what's bothering him, Kim explodes in frustration, ranting about how they keep cornering Taeon while protecting Jung Taeon. Taejoon, Taeon's older cousin, had been handed a cushy position at Youngmoon Constructions by Chairman Jung, despite being completely unqualified. Rumors of Taejoon embezzling 8 billion won have been swirling, and Taeon has been quietly waiting for the perfect opportunity to take him down. But each time, Chairman Jung intervenes. It's clear to Taeon that the chairman's favoritism isn't just about protecting Taejoon, it's about keeping Taeon in check. The old man isn't planning to easily hand over the Youngmoon Group to Taeon. Switching gears, Taeon asks Kim about the spring baseball opening game happening in 2 weeks. Kim confirms that Taeon has been invited. Taeon heads toward the door, remarking that he'll look into it. He adds that things should have settled down by then, and perhaps the chairman will start to understand where things are headed. Back in her quarters, Sahee reflects on her behavior, feeling like she should have just accepted the coffee from Taeon instead of being so cold toward him. She hopes that Mrs. Chun will recover soon so she doesn't have to run into Taeon again. Just then, her phone buzzes with a text from her friend, Kim Juwon, saying he has good news for her. Curious, Sahee immediately calls him, asking what's going on, but instead of answering, Juwon simply tells her he'll be at her place soon and that it's important. By the time Juwon arrives, Sahee is already waiting outside. He steps out of his flashy car, holding an envelope. Sahee asks him what the good news is, and Juwon teases her, saying she's too impatient. He hands her the envelope. When she asks him what it is, he tells her that it is a letter of recommendation to study abroad, which surprises her, and that the school will be expecting a response within 2 weeks. He promises her that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that her quality of life will drastically improve compared to what it is here. Just as he finishes speaking, Juwon notices the smell of cigarette smoke. He waves his hand in front of his face, and asks who's smoking. Sahee grabs his hand to stop him from waving it, and at that exact moment, Taeon walks into view, casually holding a cigarette. Sahee, feeling the tension, pushes Juwon toward his car, and tells him they should continue their conversation inside. He, oblivious to her urgency, insists he's already told her everything, but she persists, urging him to get in the car. Finally, he reluctantly does, but as he pulls away, he calls out, "I love you," making a heart sign with his hand. Sahee watches, exasperated, as Juwon drives off. She turns toward Taeon, half expecting him to have witnessed the whole awkward scene, but he's already walking away, leaving her wondering if he saw her bickering with Juwon like children. Sahee heads back inside, grumbling to herself about how everything that happens when she crosses paths with Taeon just seems to irritate her. She tries to shake it off, telling herself that Taeon is just a guest, a very important one at that, but someone who means absolutely nothing in her life. Well, that is about to change. That night, Sahee sits on her bed, flipping through the envelope Juwon gave her, her mind swirling with questions. Why is this opportunity coming now, just when she had given up on her dreams? She glances at the wall, covered with her paintings, feeling a mix of frustration and nostalgia. She had studied fine arts for 4 years, but she never truly believed it would turn into a career. She had planned to leave Yeonghwadang soon, but now, with this chance to study abroad, it feels like her options have expanded. Her thoughts are interrupted by a knock on her door. She opens it to find her uncle holding a brown bag. Smirking, she teases him, asking if he went on a date. He confirms that he did, then hands her the bag, revealing a hot dog he picked up for her because he heard she had skipped dinner. As she takes a bite, her uncle casually asks if she heard that the Jung family will be paying their respects to their deceased the following day. Sahee nods, relieved that she won't have to see any of the Jungs tomorrow. Her uncle reminisces about the time when the first son of the Jung family passed away. Everyone was in a panic, especially with Chairman Jung's intimidating presence. But Taeon, even as a college student, seemed unfazed by the chaos. He handled the situation with such calm that her uncle knew, right then and there, that Taeon was destined to take over Jungmoon. Sahee falls silent, as she recalls the day the eldest son of Jung Group passed away. She had just returned home at the time and remembered seeing the convoy pass by. Now, it clicks, Taeon had been there. The next morning, Sahee freshens up, thinking that with everyone busy paying their respects, it's the perfect time to clean the rooms before they return. However, when she arrives at Taeon's room, she's taken aback to find him standing there, his shirt open. He casually tells her that he has a favor to ask. She's immediately thrown off, her mind jumping to conclusions. She wonders if he brought a woman home while Madame Yeojin was away and now wants her to clean up the mess from the previous night. But Taeon just holds up a couple of buttons and explains that they came off his shirt. He asks if she can help him sew them back on. Sahee sighs, telling him she'll go get her sewing kit, but as she turns to leave, Taeon asks if she could finish it before his video conference in 30 minutes. She calculates in her head, getting back to her room will take her 15 minutes if she walks quickly, and then sewing, so there's no way she can make it in time. But Taeon, as if reading her mind, suggests that he follow her. As they walk to her room, Taeon notices he's walking faster than her and slows down to match her pace. When they finally reach her room, he offers her his hand to help her climb the steps. She hesitates, but he teases her, asking if she's trying to make him look like a jerk. Reluctantly, she takes his hand and climbs the steps, muttering a thank you under her breath. Once inside, she heads straight for her sewing kit, thinking to herself that once she's done, she'll send him on his way. When she comes back out with the kit, she sends him into the room so he can take off his shirt. Just then, her phone rings. It's the CEO of Senyul Publishing Company. When she answers, the CEO tells her she sent him the wrong file that morning and asks her to send the correct one back. She tells him she's currently preoccupied, and just as she says this, Taeon appears behind her, passing her his shirt while calling her name. The CEO, hearing someone in the background, starts to ask who's there, but Sahee doesn't hear him. She's too busy staring at Taeon, who is staring back at her with an intensity that makes her heart race. Taeon hands her the shirt and the buttons, and Sahee tells him to wait inside because it's cold. As she works to sew the buttons back on, Taeon sits at the doorway of her room, his eyes fixed on her. The weight of his gaze makes her uneasy, and though she tries to focus on the task, she can't help but steal a glance at him. In the process, she pricks her finger with the needle, and blood spills onto the shirt. Quickly, she puts the bleeding finger into her mouth, thinking that Taeon might not have a lot of shirts since he asked her to fix this one. She turns to him, explaining that she's finished sewing the buttons, but pricked herself in the process. Before she can say more, Taeon interrupts her, asking if she has a job. Sahee, slightly thrown off, answers yes, wondering if she looks jobless running errands around the inn. Taeon presses on, asking what kind of job she has while he begins putting on his shirt. Sahee responds, saying she is a writer. Taeon repeats the word writer as he grabs her injured hand and inspects her finger. He asks if she's well known, and Sahee says that she guesses so. Taeon says that he is curious, she simply tells him that he should be able to find out. He smiles, thanks her for the buttons, and starts to leave. Later, during a video conference, Taeon picks up his phone, distracted. He searches for Sahee online and discovers that she is a children's novelist. His secretary notices the distraction and asks if something's wrong. Taeon casually brushes it off, saying it's nothing, though his mind is still occupied with thoughts of her. Much later, as Sahee makes her way back to the inn from running an errand, she notices Lee Hyung-gu standing outside, holding flowers. She pretends not to see him, walking past with no intention of acknowledging his presence. Annoyed, Hyung-gu quickly follows, asking why she is ignoring him. Sahee, uninterested, tells him that if he has something to do at the inn, he should do it and leave. Hyung-gu doesn't take the hint, though, and insists that he came to see her, handing her the flowers. Before Sahee can react, he pops the question. Well, not a question, he tells her to marry him. As he begins to ramble on, Sahee tunes him out, her mind flashing back to the conversation she overheard between Hyung-gu and his friend. Curious, she asks him how much she's worth, how much he's willing to pay. She questions why he's pretending to be someone else, putting on a front. This pushes Hyung-gu over the edge, and in frustration, he shouts that her grandmother said they're a good match. Sahee, unimpressed, coldly replies that he should marry her grandmother instead. The situation escalates when an angry Hyung-gu grabs Sahee by the arm, demanding to know how long she plans to pretend to be someone important. She shoots back by asking him if she has to marry him even if she is a nobody. She tells him that to her, he is nothing more than a short and ugly former classmate. He starts dragging her, demanding that she follows him. She tries to pull away, yelling that he lets her go, and then Taeon shows up. As Hyung-gu releases Sahee's arm, she immediately collapses to the floor, her legs giving way beneath her. She wonders if it's nerves getting the best of her, cursing her luck that it has to happen right now. Taeon stops in front of her, his voice cutting through the moment as he asks if she has taken care of the favor he asked. He bends down and picks up the item she dropped, his casual words stinging as he remarks about the peddler selling cheap flowers around Yeonghwadang. He pulls out cash and hands it to Hyung-gu, saying he will pay for the flowers. Hyung-gu starts to protest but stops and stares in shock at the amount of money Taeon casually giving to him. He shamelessly takes it. Taeon, with barely a glance at Hyung, turns back to Sahee. He stretches his hand to her, telling her to stand up. She takes his hand and follows him, leaving Hyung-gu standing there fuming. He wonders who Taeon thinks he is to take Sahee away and treat him like a peddler. He yells that he should have been more assertive when Sahee's grandmother suddenly shows up. She asks if he's there to see Sahee, and he tells her that he is about to leave since Sahee seems busy. The grandmother eyes the flowers he's holding and, in a blunt tone, asks if Sahee hasn't opened her heart to him. Hyung-gu laughs sheepishly, claiming he'll try harder, assuring her that he'll make an effort to see Sahee again. However, the grandmother quickly shuts down his plans. She tells him that they have an important guest at Yeonghwadang and suggests that he limit his visits for now. However, he can still arrange to meet Sahee elsewhere. Hyungu wonders if the important guest is the man he saw earlier, Jung Taeon. Hyungu then tells grandmother that he will try his best, and as he leaves, Yeon Sahee is materialistic. He also thinks that no matter how much she tries, someone like her can only be a mistress of the Youngmoon group. As Taeon continues to hold Sahee's hand, they make their way to the annex. Once they arrive, Sahee quickly lets go of his hand and thanks him for his help. Taeon comments that there seem to be a lot of men around her, one who loves her and another who wants to marry her. He teasingly asks if she wouldn't have to explain all these men to the person she is dating. Sahee sighs, trying to calm herself, and quickly explains that the man from earlier was just being stubborn, while Juwon, the one she calls her extremely playful college classmate, isn't her boyfriend at all. He just throws around "I love you" like it's nothing. She wonders why she's even explaining herself to Taeon, considering it's none of his business who she spends time with. Thanking him again, Sahee prepares to leave, but Taeon stops her by hiding the plastic bag she had been carrying behind his back. He asks if she needs help dealing with Hyungu, her persistent admirer. Surprised, Sahee asks why he would help her with that. Taeon coolly replies that he came to Yeonghwadang to relax and clear his head, and if things like this keep happening, he'll be in an awkward position. So, if it happens again, she should just tell people she's dating him. He adds with a grin that if things aren't convenient for her anymore, she can always just say they broke up. Sahee brushes him off, assuring him she'll be careful not to cause any further inconvenience. She starts to leave, but Taeon stops her again by practically shoving the plastic bag in her face, asking if she doesn't want it. Sahee, a little irritated, tells him he can keep it. When Taeon asks what's inside, she casually mentions rice cakes. As she walks away, Taeon watches her go, a sense of curiosity lingering in the air. Later that night, Taeon inspects the contents of the bag and discovers it's not rice cakes, but taffy. Intrigued, he pops one in his mouth and wonders if Sahee is pulling a little trick on him. After all, she's the granddaughter of a famous shaman. As Sahee visits Mrs. Chun, she brings a dessert she made herself, feeling slightly awkward for not bringing the promised honey rice cakes. Mrs. Chun jokingly comments that while Sahee can draw really well, her culinary skills could use some work. Sahee promises to bring the rice cakes the next day, but Mrs. Chun insists she forget it, noting her legs are in no condition for a long walk. The conversation shifts when Mrs. Chun notices Sahee's clothes are dirty, prompting concern. Sahee casually brushes it off, saying she just fell. Mrs. Chun, in full motherly mode, begins inspecting her for injuries, and Sahee reassures her she's fine. She smiles at how overprotective Mrs. Chun can be, almost like a mother. Mrs. Chun admonishes her to be more careful, expressing her worry that she hasn't been able to sleep properly because of Sahee's carelessness. When Sahee returns to her room, she is surprised to find the plastic bag she left with Taeon waiting for her. Her mind flashes back to his unexpected suggestion to date him, but she quickly dismisses the thought, because needs to sleep. However, by morning, Sahee hadn't managed to sleep at all. To make matters worse, she knows she has a busy day ahead in the annex, and she's dreading the possibility of running into Taeon. As she arrives at the annex, Sahee carefully checks to make sure the coast is clear before heading toward Madam's room. Just as she approaches, she unexpectedly runs into Taeon, dressed for golf. She greets him with a quick hello, but he only gives her a curt nod in return, which annoys her. Trying to avoid any further interaction, she quickly heads into Yeojin's room, all while Taeon watches her intently. Inside Yeojin's room, Sahee quietly goes about her cleaning while Yeojin is on the phone, talking to one of Taeon's potential blind date candidate's parents, talking about how the candidate, whose name is Jisoo, used to follow Taeon around when they were kids. Sahee can't help but overhear the conversation, but she remains silent and focused on her task. When Sahee finishes, she quietly informs Yeojin that she's done. Yeojin whispers to her that she can get going before going back to her call and telling the person she is talking to that the cleaning lady just left. When Sahee steps outside and spots Taeon, still there, she offers a polite bow of greeting before trying to make her way back to her room, feeling the weight of her tiredness. But just as she reaches the gate of the annex, a golf ball unexpectedly flies past her. Taeon says sorry without any remorse and asks her to get the ball for him. Sahee, exhausted but begrudgingly complying, walks over and hands him the ball, placing it in his palm. She bows again, preparing to leave, but before she can stand up, Taeon casually drops the ball to the floor. Sahee quickly realizes that he's doing this on purpose. Annoyed, she glares at him, her patience running thin. Taeon stands there, seemingly unfazed. Thanks for watching. For part 2 and more content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.